I'm John Batchelor. The young man's name is Ben Rhodes. There's no reason for you to know who he is. However, there's a piece in the New York Times Magazine in these last days, a profile of Ben Rhodes, that raises the question of the Obama policy with regard to Iran, the Middle East, certainly Russia, Eastern Europe, China, all the foreign policy where there's been debate, feuding, upset, turmoil these last years. Ben Rhodes works for the National Security Council. The presentation he makes through an interlocutor and an investigative correspondent is that foreign policy is treated as a parlor game in which you give the other side, your opponent, bad information or the information that favors you to win, and then you call it an echo chamber. It's a parlor game. It's something like that game of telephone where you whisper all around the room and the word comes back very mangled. Well, Rhodes's version is to whisper on one side and have it come back manicured. I welcome Claudia Rosett, writing most recently about Ben Rhodes, as well as Gordon Chang of The Daily Beast, and Thaddeus McCotter, my colleague and co-host from WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes, because all three of us have worked with foreign policy these last years, especially the second term of the Obama administration, and now we know we are paying attention to the man behind the curtain. Very much. He's young. He's not 40. He has to my knowledge, no education in foreign policy, nor did he start out to be what he is right now, which is the man who creates the narrative for the foreign policy successes, if they exist, of the Obama administration. Everyone has an opinion these last days, so much so that Ben Rhodes has an opinion. And I mentioned to all three of my guests, as they know, Rhodes went on air last night. He wrote for a publication called Medium, in which he explained himself, defended himself, extended his remarks, perhaps feeling the heat from having called the media an echo chamber. Claudia, very good evening to you. I begin with you because you're nobody's echo chamber, Claudia. What is it that strikes you as surprising or unusual about Rhodes and these boasts of his? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. What's most striking, and this is a rich article in its many dimensions, but what's most striking to me is the documentation that this piece gives us that Ben Rhodes is the man who has been, his job basically, is to package and sell the lies of Obama's foreign policy. That's what he does, and he does that apparently in mind meld with the president. In other words, President Obama, whose foreign policy has been a rolling series of disasters and lies since 2009, has this man at his side hours every day, apparently, in this article says, whose job is to package and sell these lies to the country. That, to me, was the most interesting insight. Many of us have sat, certainly in the media and the press, have sat on the teleconference briefings with senior administration officials or with Ben Rhodes himself, and heard things where you look at it, you say, this is false, but it is presented in a way that makes it very hard to nail down just what's going on. And, you know, John, my basic objection here, and I actually think Ben Rhodes should resign if we lived in a time of any sense of honor or decency, if that code had not been destroyed in this White House. He should be resigning right now, not writing about himself. But what he basically, the problem isn't so much his inexperience, all right, you know, he's this point, that's not good, but it's that he came to this as an aspiring writer of fiction, and those are the talents that he has used for helping to shape, apparently, the foreign policy of what was the leader of the free world. And the result has been to debase and degrade, yes, the press, but I actually think that's secondary. It's the country and America's foreign policy itself with terrible, dangerous effects that are right now piling up on many fronts.
Gordon, a very good evening to you. Your comment about the Ben Rhodes piece, especially with regard to Asia, this so-called Asia pivot of these last years, where there's very little evidence that the Obama administration spends any time on Asia whatsoever. What was surprising about Rhodes's presentation?
I think the most surprising thing is that he actually admitted to what he was doing. I mean, if you're going to be a master deceiver, the last thing you want to do is tell the public that you've been telling lies to them, or spinning the truths in ways that really make it appear to just to throw everyone off. So I think that essentially, as Claudia says, he should resign. Well, Obama should force him out, largely because he's no longer effective for the purpose that he put him to. So I don't see him staying around for very much longer.
Thaddeus, you have a question for our guest.
Yes, to both Gordon and to Claudia. Isn't this really, in the public's mind, narrative is the nice word for lying, is it not? I mean, that's how Washington works. They sugarcoat things. There's narrative and there's truth. This individual has been putting out narrative, i.e. lying. My question would be, didn't the president know that the man doing this on his behalf was being, shall we put it kindly, inaccurate in his statements?
Oh, may I? Actually, his job was to lie for the president. That, if you go through the details in this article, that is what he does. President Obama, it's his policy. But what Ben Rhodes apparently has this great skill for doing is packaging it for President Obama in ways that can then be sold and to paper over every lie. I mean, the Exhibit A in the New York Times article is the lies that sold the Iran nuclear deal. But remember, Ben Rhodes was also the man who wrote the prep call memo for Susan Rice over Benghazi, which includes the video, that lie. His job, in other words, this is Obama. What we're seeing here is the man that President Obama has kept by his side since 2007, before he was president, and who has been effectively the packager and seller, vendor, the purveyor of the Obama foreign policy. So this is what we're really talking about here are the lies of the president, not just the lies of Ben Rhodes.
Gordon?
Yeah, but on the other side, I think that we got to remember that this was a press that didn't do its job. And also, I was actually surprised that the Iran deal got through and was not derailed. And I think that that's also a problem with the Republican majorities in Congress, that they just did not do their job either. Presidents lie. We've known this, and that's just true of both parties. But we expect the press, we expect the opposition party to do its job. And in this case, they also failed. So what you have is a debacle, which is the Iran deal, but it's a debacle that was created all over Washington, not just in the White House.
It strikes me that Ben Rhodes was helping the president as much as he could to tell a story that was unpalatable, or perhaps might not have been. Claudia, what do we glimpse of the president? Isolation, inability to speak to the American people candidly, a lack of confidence. To choose someone so naive, and Rhodes is forever naive, this boasting of the New York Times Magazine, he is talking to the paper of record forever. I mean, he will grow old and happy with his children and family, but he will remain this person, Claudia.
And actually, the spin is already beginning to try and rescue him in this relativistic world that he helps to create. I actually think, why did he do this with the New York Times? And I speculate here. I don't know. I haven't talked with David Samuels, who wrote the piece. But it reads to me as if Ben Rhodes was expecting a glowing, admiring piece and clearly had the reporter at his side in the White House quite a lot to report these details. And the piece came out perhaps different from what Ben Rhodes expected. On the other hand, I don't know that it will discomfit him quite so much. The thing that comes through from President Obama is not lack of confidence, and from Ben Rhodes is not lack of confidence. It's incredible contempt for the press, for the public, basically for the country. It's two men who have their idea of how they think foreign policy should work, and they have no interest in the counter-arguments, the alternatives, the important conventions that exist in the world. And you've seen this in the snubbing of our allies, the buddying up to our enemies, and the thing that they seek to do is not to adjust their policy for what the world does. It's to cram it down the throats of Americans by lies, by spin, by whatever it takes, the tweets, and in this, I've been thinking a lot about the problem with the press here, and I'm going to say, well, I do agree that there's a great problem with the media. That the bigger problem is it is the usual thing that when an administration is caught in a lie, it backs off, it atones, it apologizes, it gets caught in a scandal. It's a big problem. This administration does not fire people, does not respond that way. What it does is spin, that's Ben Rhodes' talent, repackage it, and double down on the lies. That's what we saw with the Iran deal. It's what we saw with Benghazi. It's what we saw with Obamacare on the domestic front. This is the President Obama administration. So the problem really is the bully pulpit itself does not say, oops, got caught in a lie, we'll better do something about that. What they say is, it wasn't a lie, and they hand out a different lie. And it's that repackaging, what comes clear in this piece, that's what Ben Rhodes' great talent is, and that's what his job has been as the president's foreign policy guru. He packages the lies.
We're going to turn to Asia next, but I wanted to draw Thaddeus out on this. Thaddeus, looking at this piece, you spent years in Washington, and everybody had to accept a level of cynicism that doesn't travel well. So it's Washington cynicism. Did this strike you as typical of Washington cynicism or a break in the action?
No, that's why I was always disgusted with the place. They care more about narrative than they do truth. So in that hothouse of insanity and inanity, this individual is blowing his own horn because he thinks he was doing it better than anybody else, and that this is commonly accepted practice, and that this vice is a virtue. And as for the president, it goes back to he believes he's smarter than you. And he has to fool you to go along with him until you realize eventually your own stupidity and his own perspicacity. And Mr. Rhodes is just a minion helping him do that.
Thaddeus McCotter, Claudia, Rosett, Gordon Chang. We're going to turn to China and North Korea next. There's been a People's Congress, and Kim Jong-un is making unusual threats. Leave me alone, and I won't use my nukes. I'm John Batchelor.